My father left me $200 in his will. 200, not 200,000. The lawyer read it out in a room with a view of half of Los Angeles, and he had to say it twice because everybody assumed he'd dropped some zeros. To my son, Rory Bellamy, the sum of $200. That was it. That was the whole line. There wasn't a sentence after it. My sister Tessa got the rest, $27 million. The house in Bel Air, the one with the gate and the olive trees that my father bought when I was 12. The cars. The whole thing, top to bottom, to a 29-year-old who has never held a job in her life. And when it was done, and people were standing up and pretending not to look at me, my sister came over. She wasn't even gloating. That's what I want you to understand. She said it the way you'd tell somebody their flight was delayed. She said, "Don't make a scene, Rory. He always hated you. You knew that. Everyone knew that." Then she put her sunglasses on and went to lunch. I was 34 years old. I had $1,100 to my name, a son I could barely afford to see, and a father who'd just told the state of California, in a legal document, exactly what I was worth to him. 6 weeks later, I was washing cars at a dealership out in the valley. $20 an hour. You stand in the sun with a hose and a mitt and you do 60, 70 cars a day, and there is a particular thing that happens to a man's mind when he's cleaning bird mess off a Range Rover that costs more than his father left him. And there was an old man in the service bay who watched me. I noticed him the first week. Black guy, 79 years old, hands like tree roots, still turning wrenches 3 days a week because they can't get him to leave. Everybody called him Book, and he watched me. Not friendly, not unfriendly. He'd be halfway under a car and he'd stop and look at me across that lot for 10, 15 seconds at a stretch, and then go back to work. Weeks of that. I figured he'd decided I was lazy. I figured he'd seen 100 guys like me come through and wash cars for a summer and quit. Then, on a Thursday in June, and I didn't know yet that Thursday meant anything, he came out to the wash bay while I was coiling the hose. He stood there a second, and he said, "You're Gus Bellamy's boy." It wasn't a question. I said yes. And this old man looked at me for a long moment, and something moved in his face, and he said, "Your father came here every Thursday for 20 years. I said that was impossible. My father had never mentioned this place in his life. And Booker Tate said he left something with me in 2004. 22 years I've had it in a drawer, and he made me swear on my own mother that I would not put it in your hand until you hit rock bottom." He reached into the chest pocket of his coveralls and took out an envelope. Old. Soft at the corners, the way paper gets when it's been handled and put back 1,000 times. He said, "I've been watching you since April, son. I had to be sure." I opened it, right there, standing in a puddle, with the hose still in my other hand, and I stopped breathing. Here's how you'll know if this story is for you. If $200 is a small number to you, if it's a dinner, if it's a tank of gas and a phone bill, then you'll hear the rest of this as a nice twist and you'll forget it by Thursday. That's fine. No hard feelings. But if there has ever been a moment in your life when $200 was the entire difference, when somebody put a number that small in your hand and it turned out to be the hinge everything after it swung on, then stay and subscribe, because you're the only person I actually make these for, and this whole story is about that number, and you already know something my sister will never know. Because that's the thing. The $200 was not an insult. I want to say that clearly right now, at the start, because you've spent the last 2 minutes thinking what everybody in that lawyer's office thought, and what my sister still thinks, and what my father was counting on all of you thinking. That $200 was the most valuable thing in my father's entire estate. It was worth more than the house, more than the $27 million. And there were exactly 2 men alive who could read it, and one of them had been dead for 6 weeks, and the other one was standing in front of me in a wash bay with grease under his nails. My sister got the money. I got the seed it grew from. Let me back all the way up, because none of it lands until you know who my father actually was. And I have to tell you something first. I didn't know either. Not until June. I'm 34 years old, and I found out who my dad was 6 weeks ago, from a stranger, 4 months after we buried him. My name is Rory Bellamy. I'm 34. I have a son. Milo, he's 8. He lives with his mother, Jenna, in Reseda, and she is a better person than I've been for the last 2 years, and we both know it, and she has never once used it against me, which somehow makes it worse. And I want to be honest about how I got to a wash bay at 34, because if I let you believe I was some noble victim of a rich family, I'm lying to you, and the whole story falls apart. I wasn't robbed. I fell. I had a business. A small one, honest, mine. I built out custom interiors for vans, the conversion thing, and for about 4 years it worked. I was good at it. I had 2 guys working for me. Then I made 3 bad calls in 18 months, and the last one was a big contract I took on credit that went sideways, and it ate everything. The shop, the tools, the truck, and when it started going, I did the thing that ends marriages, which is that I lied about it. Not big lies. I just kept telling Jenna it was fine for about 9 months longer than it was fine, and by the time she found out how bad it was, the lying was the part she couldn't get past, and she was right. So, divorced at 32. Business gone at 33. Living in a converted garage in Van Nuys at 34. Behind on support, seeing my kid every other weekend and dreading it. Because every other weekend Milo asks me what I'm working on now, and I have to look my 8-year-old in the eye and find something to say. That's rock bottom. Not the money. The look on your kid's face when he's decided not to ask you a question because he's figured out the answer makes you sad. 8 years old and already managing his father's feelings. Here's the part I never told anybody until now. I could have called my dad. Any day, any single day of that whole slide, I could have picked up the phone and called the man with $27 million in Bel Air, and he would have covered all of it without noticing. The shop, the house, all of it. Pocket change to him. I didn't call, and here's what I didn't understand until June. He'd already tried, twice. Years back, before the divorce, when the business was still good, my father wired me money I hadn't asked for. Big numbers, no note, no phone call, just a deposit. And both times I did exactly what you'd expect a proud 30-year-old to do with charity from a man who wouldn't say a word to him. I sent it back the same day. The second time, he sent it again. I sent it back again. We never once spoke about it. 2 grown men moving money back and forth like a slap fight, neither of them able to say a sentence out loud. So no, I didn't call, and he didn't call me. 2 years, while I went down. He knew. Tessa told me later, gleefully, that he knew, that he'd asked about me, and he sat up in that house on the hill and let me drown, and then he died, and then he left me $200. You understand why I believed her at the funeral. When Tessa said, "He always hated you," she wasn't telling me anything I hadn't already concluded on my own with pretty good evidence. I had never been so wrong about anything in my life. But I want you to sit in the version I was living in, because I lived in it for 2 years, and I'd have gone to my grave in it if an old man hadn't gotten tired of waiting. My father was Gus Bellamy. He died in February at 65, and there were 400 people at the service. You may have seen his trucks. Bellamy Auto Glass, the blue ones, the chip repair vans. They're all over California. He started with one shop in 1991, and when he sold the company he had 41 locations, and that's the $27 million. And here's the man he was, or the man I thought he was, which is the same thing to a kid. My father was Polish, that's the only word for it. Every hair in place, every shirt pressed, a watch you noticed. He had a laugh he used at parties that I never once heard him use at home. He liked expensive wine, and he liked people to know he liked expensive wine. When people asked how he started out, he had a line, and I heard him say it maybe 200 times in my life. "Oh, I was in the trades, worked my way up, nothing exciting. Worked my way up, nothing exciting." He bought the Bel Air house in 2004, when I was 12. And that's the year the family split into 2 families that lived at the same address, because Tessa was 8 in 2004. Tessa doesn't remember before. To my sister, that house is the family. She grew up in it. She learned to swim in that pool. Every single thing she knows about who the Bellamys are, she learned inside a gate on a hill, from a father who by then had been performing for 4 years and was very, very good at it. Tessa isn't evil, I need to say that, because it would be easy. My sister is a completely successful product, She believes exactly what she was raised to believe, which is that we were always this, that our father was a great man who came from somewhere respectable, and that her older brother's a screw-up who couldn't hack it. She's not lying to me. That's her actual world. And when she said, "He always hated you," she meant it as a kindness in her way. She was telling me to stop expecting. But I was 12 in 2004, and that's the difference between my sister and me, and it turned out to be the only difference that mattered. I remember before the house, we lived in an apartment in Reseda, 2 bedrooms. My dad drove a van with his own name on the side that he'd painted himself badly, and I know he painted it himself because I watched him do it in a parking lot with a roll of tape and a level. And that man, the man in the van, I liked him. That's the thing I've never been able to explain to anyone. I liked my father. He was funny. He was profane. He smelled like solvent, and he had a laugh that came out of him sideways, a real one, nothing like the party one. He'd take me on jobs on Saturdays and let me hold the suction cups, and he'd talk to the customers like they were people. And every so often somebody couldn't pay, and he'd do it anyway and tell me in the van, "Don't tell your mother." He had a scar on his left hand between the thumb and finger, a bad old one, and when I was little I'd trace it and he'd make up a different story every time. Shark, bear, ninjas, that's my father. That's the actual one. I had him until I was 12. And then, in 2004, he bought the house on the hill, and within about a year, that man was gone, and this other man showed up wearing his face, the pressed one, the wine one, the worked my way up, nothing exciting one, and he never came back, not once, not in 22 years, and I never forgave him for it. That's the honest truth, and it's the whole tragedy. I spent my entire adult life quietly, constantly angry at my father, and I thought I was angry because he was cold and I was a disappointment. That's not why. I was angry because I'd met the real one, and he'd left, and this stranger was living in his house and using his name. Tessa never met that man. She can't miss him. You can't grieve somebody you never got. And it turns out, and this is the part I found out standing in a puddle in June, it turns out my father was doing something every Thursday for 20 years to keep that man alive. Just not where anybody could see it. Not where his kids could see it. He drove out to a garage in the valley and he was Gus for 4 hours, and then he drove home and put the other one back on. He never once thought to bring his son. He did bring me. One time. In 2004. I just didn't know what I'd seen. I have to tell you about the day in 2004 because it's the hinge of everything, and I carried it around for 22 years as a piece of junk. It was a Thursday in September. I was 12. They'd just closed on the Bel Air house. Days before, the boxes were still stacked in the new place, and my father came and got me out of school early, which he had never done, and he didn't say why, and we drove out to the valley in the Mercedes he'd bought about 10 minutes after he could afford it. And we pulled into a dealership service lot. And I remember being confused because we didn't own that kind of car, and because my father had a look on his face I didn't have a word for at 12. I have one now. He looked scared. He said, "Wait here, bud, 10 minutes. He was gone about 40. I sat in that car in a service lot and got bored out of my mind, and at some point I got out and stood in the shade by the bay door, and that's the piece I kept, because I could see him in there, way in the back. My father, in his new suit, standing next to a workbench with an old black man in coveralls, and they were talking, and my father was doing something with his hands. And at one point, I saw this, I'm sure of it, it's one of the clearest things in my head from that entire year. At one point, my father put his forehead down on that old man's shoulder for a second. My dad, the new one, the pressed one, standing in a garage with his head on a mechanic's shoulder. And then he came out and got in the car, and he was fine. He was completely fine. He had the face back on, and we drove home and he bought me an In-N-Out and he never said one word about it. Not that day, not ever. Not for 22 years. I asked him once, when I was maybe 15, in the way kids ask things. I said, "Hey, what was that place we went that time, with the old guy?" And my father said, without even looking up, "What place?" And I dropped it because he was already becoming somebody you dropped things around. So I filed it under nothing. One weird afternoon, my dad had some errand at a car place once. That's all it was for 2 decades. Now I know exactly what I was looking at. I was watching my father hand a man an envelope and swear him to secrecy and put his head down for 1 second because he'd just bought a house on a hill and he knew, that week, that year, that he was about to lose himself. And he was doing the only thing he could think of to leave a rope behind for whoever came after. I was standing 30 feet away. I was the whoever. So now you can understand how I ended up washing cars at that specific dealership, because everybody asks, and everybody assumes it's some enormous coincidence, and it isn't. It's much stranger than that. I went there on purpose. I just didn't know why. In April, I needed a job. Any job, immediately. I was 2 months behind on support, and I'd have taken anything. And there are, 150 dealerships in Los Angeles County. I applied to a few, and then one morning I woke up in that garage in Van Nuys, and I had this itch in my head about a place out in the valley, and I couldn't have told you the name of it, but I could see the shape of the lot, the bay doors, where the shade fell. And I drove out there, 40 minutes, past 2 other dealerships that were also hiring. I told myself it was because they had a sign up. That's what I told myself the whole drive. The truth is that some animal part of me had been keeping that lot on file for 22 years, because it was the last place I ever saw my actual father. And when everything in my life was gone, that part of me went back to the last place I'd seen him. Not the house, not the grave. A service lot in the valley where a man I liked once put his head on somebody's shoulder. I didn't know that's what I was doing. I want to be clear. I found it out later, sitting in my truck, when Booker Tate said, "Your father came here every Thursday," and my whole body knew before my brain did. I felt it go through me like cold water. I filled out the application at a counter with a pen on a chain. And here's what I didn't know. An old man in the back was watching me do it. Booker told me about this in June, and he laughed while he told it, and then he stopped laughing. He said the service manager brought him the application, because that's a thing they do there. They run new hires past Book, 79 years old, and they still ask him because he's been there since 1971, and he's usually right about people. And he looked at the name. Bellamy. He said he had to go sit down in the parts room for about 10 minutes. He said, 22 years I had that envelope. And I'd been figuring honestly that I'd die with it in that drawer, and my daughter would find it and throw it out, and that'd be the end of it. And then a man walks in off the street with the name on him and Gus's whole face, and he's asking to wash cars. He told the manager to hire me. Then he watched me for 2 months. I asked him why he waited. 2 months, watching me sweating a lot, with the thing in his pocket. And Booker got very serious. And he said the sentence that I think about now more than almost anything my own father ever said to me. He said, "Because your daddy didn't say, 'bring it to him when he's sad.' He said, 'rock, bottom.' And those are different, son, and I've been alive long enough to know the difference, and I wasn't going to get it wrong on the one thing that man ever asked me for." He said, "Sad is a man who lost something. Rock bottom is a man who stopped arguing about it." And then he told me what he'd been watching for, and I want to give you this exactly, because it's the most attention anybody has paid me in my life. He said he watched to see if I'd quit. Guys wash cars for 2 weeks and quit. I didn't quit. He said he watched what I did when the Escalade came in with the dog mess in the 3rd row and everybody found somewhere else to be. He said I did it, and I didn't complain, and I didn't make a face where anybody could see, and I cleaned it properly instead of fast. He said he watched me with the porters. There's a kid there, 19, real slow with the paperwork, and everybody rides him about it. And he said he watched me not do that. He said, "You covered for that boy twice, and you never once told anybody you did it." I saw both times. And he said, and this is the one that got me, he said he watched me on my phone at lunch. He said, "You'd sit on that curb every day at noon and get out your phone, and your whole face would change, and then you'd put it away and it'd go back. Took me 3 weeks to figure out you got a kid." And I thought, all right, that's a man at the bottom who's still got something he's holding up out of the water. He said, "That's what your daddy meant." He didn't mean broke. Broke's easy, broke's just a number. He meant the place where a man finally can't lie to himself anymore. And I couldn't hand you that envelope one day before you got there, because if I did, you'd have read it, and it wouldn't have meant a thing to you. I said, "Why? Why would it matter?" And Booker Tate looked at me and said, "Because that's the only place your father could ever hear anything either. Man never learned a thing in his life standing up." We sat in his truck in the back of the lot, because it was the only place with shade, and Booker Tate told me about my father. He said, "October of 1985. I was 38 years old, I was the lead tech here, and there was a man sleeping in the alley behind this building." That was my dad. 25 years old. I'm going to give you what Booker gave me, and I'm not going to clean it up because he didn't. My father was a drunk. Not a guy who drank. A drunk, the real thing. At 25. And he'd been thrown out by his own family, and he'd burned every person who'd ever tried. And he was living in an alley behind a dealership in the valley in October of 1985. He'd been stealing. Booker was very specific about that. He said, "Your daddy stole from this shop before I ever knew his name. He was coming over the fence and taking parts out of the bins and selling them, and I knew it was him, and I could have called the police, and I want you to understand I thought about it." He said, "And then one morning I come in early, and he's asleep against the fence in the rain, and he's got one of our alternators under his coat like a baby, and he wakes up and he sees me and he doesn't run. That's the thing. He didn't run. He just sat there in the rain and looked at me and started crying. 25 years old, and he said, 'I don't know how to stop.'" Booker was quiet for a while. Then he said, "So I gave him a job, and I gave him $200 out of my own pocket, because he owed some people and they were going to hurt him, and $200 was what I had in the coffee can in my kitchen, and my wife was not happy with me, and I want to be honest with you, I did not think it would work. I gave that boy $200 the way you throw a rock at a lion. I did it because I couldn't do nothing." I said, "And it worked?" And Booker laughed, this dry old laugh, and he said, "Hell no. Not for 4 years. He robbed me twice more. He'd come in drunk, I'd send him home. He disappeared for 5 months in '87, and I figured he was dead. That's what nobody understands about that number, and it's why you're not going to understand your daddy till you understand it." He said, "The $200 didn't save your father. It bought him 4 more years of chances. That's all money ever does. It just buys you more time to keep failing until one day something else takes." He said, "Gus got sober in 1989, 4 years after the $200. And Booker said he didn't do it, and the money didn't do it, and he doesn't know what did it. He said, 'I've thought about that for 40 years, and I got nothing.' One day, the man just stood up different. My father worked in that shop until 1991. Booker taught him everything: glass, bodywork, how to talk to a customer, how to price a job, how to keep books, everything that later became 41 locations and $27 million and a house on a hill in Bel Air. Every dollar of my sister's inheritance came out of that garage. She has never heard of it. She doesn't know the name Booker Tate. There is not one photograph of that man in the house on the hill. And my father sat under a roof that garage paid for and told 400 people at a party that he'd worked his way up. Nothing exciting. And every Thursday for 20 years he drove back. I asked Booker what they did on the Thursdays. 20 years. What do you even talk about? And he said, "Nothing. We didn't talk about hardly anything." He said my father would show up around 1 o'clock. He'd take off the jacket and the watch. Booker was very clear about the watch. He said, "Gus took that watch off in the parking lot every single time before he came in, and he'd put on a pair of coveralls he kept in a locker in the back, and he'd work for 4 hours on whatever was up on the lift, for free, 20 years. Booker said, "Your father was worth more money than this whole dealership, and he'd be under a Corolla with a busted heater core on a Thursday afternoon because a lady out in Pacoima needed her car back. And then at 5 he'd take the coveralls off and put the watch back on and go home." I asked why. I said, "Book, why would he do that?" And this old man said, because it was the only place on God's earth where he wasn't lying. He said, everywhere else in that man's life, everybody was talking to a fella that didn't exist. He built himself a whole person, and it worked so good he couldn't get out of it. Couldn't tell his wife. Couldn't tell his kids. 400 people at his funeral, and not one of them knew he slept in an alley. Except me. I knew him before there was anything to know, and that's all he came out here for. 4 hours a week, to be in a room with somebody who knew, so he could put it down for a minute. He said he wasn't visiting me, son, he was visiting himself. And then Booker said the thing that broke it open. He said, in 2004 he bought that house. And he came out here that week with a boy in the car. That was you, and I remember you. You were standing by the bay door in a striped shirt, and you had your daddy's exact face on you, and he was in a bad way. He said, Book, I got the house. And I said, congratulations. And he said, I'm going to lose them. I said, lose who? Booker said, that's what I asked him. And he said, my kids, I can feel it. I'm turning into it, and I can't stop it, and by the time they're grown, they're going to think I was always this. He said, my father stood in that shop and said, the money is going to eat me, and my kids are going to inherit a man who never existed, and they'll never know where any of it came from. And there's nothing I can do about it because I can't stop. I've tried. I like it too much. It's the same thing as the drinking, and I already know I'm going to lose. That's what my father knew in 2004, at 44, standing in a garage with his 12-year-old son 30 feet away. He'd already run the math on himself, and he was right. He was right about every part of it. And then he took out an envelope. There were 2 things in it. The first was a $200 bill, which does not exist, so let me be accurate. It was 10 20s, folded once, held with a paperclip that had rusted a shadow of itself onto the top one. 1980s bills, old design, soft as cloth. It was the $200. Booker's $200, out of a coffee can in a kitchen in 1985. My father paid him back inside of a year, and Booker took it, because he said a man like Gus needed to pay it back. And then my father asked for it back, the actual bills, those exact ones, and Booker gave them to him, and my father carried that money in his wallet, those same 20 bills, for 15 years. Booker said he'd seen it 100 times. Gus would pull out his wallet in the shop and there'd be the clip, and in 2004 he put it in an envelope and left it. Here. The second thing was a letter. 1 page, both sides, in my father's terrible handwriting. The real one, the fast one, not the one he signed cards with. I'm not going to read you all of it. Some of it's mine. But here's what it said near enough. He wrote that if I was reading this, then Booker thought I was at the bottom, and that Booker was never wrong about that, and that I should trust him. He wrote that he was writing it on the worst day of his life, which was the day he closed on a house he'd wanted for 20 years, and that he'd figured out in the driveway that he was never going to be able to explain that sentence to anyone in his family, and that was the moment he understood he'd already lost. He wrote about the alley, all of it. The stealing, the rain, the alternator under his coat, the crying. I don't know how to stop. My father wrote that down for his 12-year-old son to read someday, and then he left it in a drawer in a garage. And then he wrote the part that stopped me breathing, and I'm going to give it to you word for word, because I've read it about 400 times since June and I've got it. He wrote, Rory, I'm going to leave your sister the money. All of it, probably, if I know myself, and by then I'll have a good reason, and the reason will be a lie. The money doesn't work. It didn't work on me. $200 didn't save me, and neither did 27 million, and I want you to understand, those are the same sentence. I know what I'm going to do to you. I'm going to try to fix you with money, because it's all I'll have left by then, and every dollar's going to make it worse, and you're going to hate me for being cold, when the truth is, I'll be trying so hard, I'll be making you weaker every time. So I'm not leaving you money, I'm leaving you the $200, and I'm leaving it in the one place on earth I'm not a liar, with the one man who'll know when to hand it to you. Here's what it means. A man gave it to me when I was worth nothing, and had stolen from him twice. It didn't fix me. It bought me 4 years of chances I did not deserve, and one of those years took. That's all it was. It wasn't a miracle. Somebody just decided I was worth 4 more years of being wrong. You're going to end up somewhere bad. I don't know how, but you're mine, so you will. And when you get there, you're going to think it's the end of the story. It isn't. It's the exact spot I was standing in when a stranger handed me this money. You're not the failure in this family, son. You're the only one who got the real thing. Tessa got the house. You got me. I'm sorry. I would give every dollar of it back to be the man in the van again, and I couldn't figure out how, not for 22 years. So I did the only thing I could think of, which was to leave you a rope. $200. It's not a joke, and it's not an insult, and it's not small. It's everything I have. Everything else on the hill is just what it turned into. And under his name he wrote one more line. Ask Book about my hand. So I did. And Booker Tate held up his own left hand and turned it over, and there was a scar between the thumb and the finger, the same one. The exact one I traced when I was 4 years old while my dad made up stories about sharks and ninjas. 1986. They were pulling a windshield and it came apart, and Booker went for it, and my father went for Booker, and they both got cut. Same piece of glass, same second, same place on the hand. 40 years. 2 men walking around Los Angeles with the same scar, and one of them told his son it was a bear. Here's what's happened since. It's been about a month, so this isn't a happy ending, it's just where I am. I still wash cars. I want to say that plainly, because I think you're waiting for the part where the $200 turns out to be a treasure map and I go get the $27 million. There's no map, there's no lawsuit. The will is airtight. My father wrote it himself, on purpose, exactly the way he told me he would, 22 years before he did it. He knew what he was doing. He always knew what he was doing. That was the whole problem with him. Tessa has the money. She'll always have the money. I've never told her about any of it. I've thought about it a lot. I could drive up there tomorrow and put that letter in her hand and take that whole house apart in about 4 minutes. She'd never look at her father the same way again, and she'd never look at herself the same way again, and honestly, some nights, that's a warm thought. I'm not going to, not because I'm better than that, because I did the math and it comes out ugly. What would I actually be doing? I'd be handing my sister a bomb to make myself feel bigger. She's 29. She didn't build the lie. She got born into it and raised inside it, and she is exactly what he made on purpose. And my father spent his whole life doing damage to people with the truth withheld, and I'm not going to spend mine doing damage with the truth delivered. Same man, different direction. And besides, she got $27 million and a father who never let her meet him. That's not something I need to add to, so she keeps the house. And I keep the thing that came out of the garage. I haven't spent the $200. It's in my wallet, clipped, those exact 20 bills, and I know how that sounds and I don't care. It'll get spent someday, it's supposed to, that's the whole point of it. It's just not time. Booker Tate is 79 and he comes in Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. And on Thursdays, I take my lunch at 1. I don't say anything about it, and neither does he. I just go back to the bay and I stand where somebody's standing and I hand him what he needs before he asks for it. And he's teaching me glass, bodywork, the pricing, the customers, the exact things, in the exact order he taught a drunk kid out of an alley in 1985. I'm 34, and I'm being taught a trade by a 79-year-old man in a garage my father built an empire out of and then lied about at parties. I'm going to open a shop, a small one. I know how. I did it before, and I know exactly which 3 things I got wrong. And I've got a teacher now, which I didn't have last time. And I called Jenna. That's the real one. That's the actual thing that came out of that envelope, and it wasn't money. I called my ex-wife and I told her the truth about the last 2 years. All of it. The lying? All of it? The part where I knew 9 months before I said anything. I didn't ask for anything. I didn't ask her to take me back. That's not where we are. I just stopped arguing about it. And she was quiet for a while, and then she said, "Why now?" And I said, "Because somebody just handed me $200. She's letting me have Milo on Thursdays now, just dinner, that's all. Last week he asked me what I'm working on, and instead of doing the thing I've done for 2 years, instead of finding something to say, I told my 8-year-old the truth. I said, "Buddy, I wash cars right now, and I'm learning a trade from an old man, and it's going to take me a couple of years and it's going to be all right." And Milo said, "Okay, that's it." That's all he said. He wasn't disappointed. He'd never needed me to be anything. He just needed me to stop lying, which is the exact thing my father could never do for me. And I did it at a Denny's on a Thursday because a stranger in coveralls decided to wait 2 months for me to hit the floor. I'm going to leave you with the $200 because you know somebody who needs it, and I want to be specific about what it actually is. It is not a rescue. Booker said it best, and I'm just repeating him. It doesn't fix anybody. My father proved that. He took the 200 and robbed the man twice more and disappeared for 5 months and stayed drunk for 4 more years. The money did nothing. What it did was buy 4 more years of a stranger being willing to be wrong about him. That's the whole thing. That's all any of it ever is. Somebody looks at a person who has given them every reason to quit and decides to be wrong about them for a little while longer, and most of the time you never find out if it took. Booker didn't find out for 4 years. He didn't find out what it really grew into for 40. So, if you're sitting there right now with somebody in your head, the one who's burned you, the one everybody's given up on, the one who's stolen from you twice and you're done, I'm not going to tell you to save them. You can't. Nobody can. That's not on the table. I'm asking if you've got $200 worth of being wrong about them left in you. One more time. Not because they've earned it. Because you can't do nothing. That's it. That's the whole ask. My father left me $200 and my sister got 27 million, and she thinks I'm the one he hated. He left me the coffee can. He left her what it turned into. I got the better half of the will, and it took me 34 years and a wash bay and a 79-year-old man with my father's scar on his hand to be able to read it.